Welcome to Chris Strub Unmuted. I'm Chris Strub, and today we're talking about compassion. It gets harder and harder every day to remind yourself of how much we really do rely on one another and love one another for who we are. But my spirit is not broken. This is Chris Strub Unmuted, a show designed for open dialogue, honest reflection, and uncensored truths about the lives that we lead. Today's episode looks at compassion. And not just compassion, but compassion here in late 2025 when we're recording into early 2026 when this is released. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I was not born and raised here. I was born and raised on Long Island. And one of the biggest adjustments that I've had to make in moving my entire life and being down here to South Carolina has been the political environment. And in another episode we just recorded, talked about 50 states, 100 days. This was this trip that is largely legacy defining for Chris Strub took place in the summer of 2015. And that was a fascinating time for our country. You know, this was the end of Barack Obama's tenure as president. And I remember being in the newsroom in Binghamton, New York, when Barack Obama was inaugurated. I remember the feeling through the newsroom that I was in and seemingly through the country of hope and joy and a brighter future, and electing a Black man for the first time to the office of the presidency. It was amazing to live through that moment. And sadly, that moment for me, not even so much for me, but I think for many other Americans, was sort of shrouded in uncertainty and fear, right? Like the most powerful man in America for the first time in more than 200 years is now a Black man. And I don't know about you, but I remember feeling anxiety back then of like, is something bad going to happen here? Right? Meaning something bad happening to Barack Obama himself. And fortunately and unfortunately, my concerns kind of came true. Why do I say fortunately and unfortunately? Well, fortunately, nothing happened, at least yet, to Barack Obama, right? Obviously, he made it through 8 years of his presidency. I remember the scandal about him wearing a tan suit and how awful that was for the country, right? The unfortunate part is that I felt like Obama's tenure has led to a national backlash that might really be worse than anything I could have imagined on the night that he was inaugurated. And I wanted to make sure to put this episode on record. And I'm not going to go wild with filming episodes about politics all the time. It's certainly not a political podcast. But it's extremely important for me to put on the record here my disgust, my disdain, my fear, my sadness, disappointment, all of those feelings about where our nation and our national discourse has gone, frankly, since the summer of 2015. I remember seeing the news of Donald Trump announcing that he was going to run for president. And my initial thought, and there's a tweet from back then that you can dig up from me, where I publicly said there's no chance, there's zero chance that Donald Trump will become president. Now, I was wrong. I've been wrong about a gazillion things in my life. That was one of them. I didn't think that a Donald Trump presidency was possible. I was wrong. And I certainly, well, I don't want to say that. I didn't think that a second Donald Trump presidency was coming either, but I was certainly a lot less sure the second time around. I am mortified and disgusted and horrified and saddened and frankly mentally beaten down by the political climate that our country exists in now here in late 2025 into early 2026. Over the last 10 years, I feel like have developed a deeper understanding of the machinations of a lot of the American political system. And understand the irresistible gravitational forces of power and clinging to power. God, I remember Senator Chuck Schumer speaking at my college graduation, and then speaking years later at my sister's college graduation, and then seeing a clip from like last year, like 2024, and he's still using the same stump speech that he was probably using in the 80s and 90s, right? So I think, broadly speaking, there are inherent deep issues within the way American politics function as a whole. I also think that our current president is responsible for the unprecedented degradation of the way that we live and function together as a society in America. And I say that as a man who has personally traveled, not just gone to all 50 states, but connected directly with people on the ground, again, mostly in the nonprofit sector during those travels, who do irreplaceable and invaluable work within their own communities. And I've connected with people that work at the smallest nonprofits you can imagine, all the way up to last week. We're recording this here in December 2025, helping produce a live streamed interview with Asha Curran, the CEO and co-founder of Giving Tuesday herself. Spoken to everybody on that spectrum. And universally, both in those interactions with folks in the nonprofit sector and folks that live and work in everyday life, regardless of their industry, I still believe now that we as Americans are born with kindness and humility and compassion and respect for one another and love for one another. I sincerely do believe that. But it gets harder and harder every day to remind yourself of how much we really do rely on one another and love one another for who we are. It just gets harder and harder. But my spirit is not broken here. When I visited 50 states, 100 days, and with the many amazing people that I've connected with, both in person and or through social media over the last decade plus now, I believe we are good people at heart. I believe we have one another's best interests at heart. I can't help but still believe that we as Americans care about one another. And I also believe, as I said, that modern American politics are more broken than they've ever been. I, by no means, am do I believe directly in, yeah, the Democrats have all the answers and the Republicans are the worst. Not at all. Not at all. I was a registered Republican in high school, into college, voted Republican way back in the day when I was young enough to start voting. And I think that these conversations require a lot more nuance than a left or right, red or blue immediate decision. I'm very interested in political conversations and what drives us as Americans to believe in what we do believe in and who we believe in and why. And having been blessed to really meet some of the most incredible people in America, I do honestly believe that we at heart, at our core, still have built within us racist tendencies. And a lot of people won't like hearing that. And that's okay. But I believe that it is incumbent on all of us to continue to make strides to love one another for who we are as a nation, and use our voices both publicly like this and politically on election days to get out and support leaders who espouse those same beliefs that we believe in. And it's sad to me sometimes that we have to acknowledge that we have ditched what I believe to be a sound moral compass. I believe morals do matter, and it's unbelievable to me how we've been able to varnish over some of the things that have been said in the American political discourse, especially by our president over the last few years, by saying, oh, he's a change agent and he's rough around the edges, and that's just who we are. It's deeper than that to me, man. Words matter. Actions matter too. I've always tried to be someone whose actions match his words. And sometimes I kick myself for not being more vocal in what I believe in. I like to think that through my actions, especially a trip like 50 States, 100 Days, like if you've read this book, you watch the film, I mean, you know where I stand about humanity. It's not, there's nothing political about 50 States, 100 Days. It's about being humane. And it's unbelievable to me that humanity has come down on different sides of the political aisle. You know, that we can judge our neighbors based on their ethnicity, based on their gender or their choice of gender or their sexuality. Like, how dare you judge someone based on who they choose to love? I mean, it just makes me sick, you know, and I'm not starting a podcast or designing this podcast to be able to or you know, to try and influence people politically or to promote stances or especially candidates or anything like that. For me, love is love, compassion is compassion. And as someone who has a, you know, I mean, an unofficial PhD in Americana, being out there and meeting people where they are, I know what I believe about who we are as Americans and who we should ascribe to be with our neighbors and with our community. And I'll admit it's hard. It's hard living in a state that in 2024 voted 58.2% for a president who has hundreds of times just stated out loud his stance on hatred for different ethnic groups, for disabled people, his disdain and disgusting stances on women. You know, all of this, not even to touch on the idea of appearing in the Epstein files that as of this recording are still being suppressed. And I'm going to guess by the time you hear this, are probably still being suppressed too. You know, I live in Greenville County. Oftentimes you see in states that the urban areas, the cities are sometimes more liberal. That's in fact not the case here in Greenville County. 60.2% of voters in Greenville County last year on election day, 2024 presidential election, voted for Donald Trump. Again, I'm not ascribing all of that to Republican versus Democrat. I'm also acknowledging the fact that I do think that our political system is broken. You know, I agree a lot with what Bernie Sanders and other smart politicians have said, which is that, yes, the political system as we know it these days in America is broken. It's not serving people, and for better or for worse, electing someone who is going in to kick the walls down, literally and figuratively now with this ballroom. People want change. But unfortunately, the leader that we put in place for change is creating change in our daily discourse that is, in my opinion, leading us as Americans in a terrible direction. And what worries me too is, you know, again, when people, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. But as you get older and the presidency is known to age people at a very accelerated rate, Donald Trump being the oldest president we've ever had, he eats McDonald's, not Burger King, every day, right? He thinks that exercise depletes a finite amount of energy that we are bestowed at birth. So don't exercise. You're gonna burn out the finite amount of energy that you like. Huh? What? I worry that having had family members of my own die of dementia-related causes, that we may be witnessing a similar progression of dementia in real time. And the firestorm of daily headlines happening around this doesn't allow us to zoom out and think about the bigger picture of where this could be heading in the years to come. I am extremely concerned. I'm extremely concerned. So just remember, we're born as Americans to love one another. And I hope that anyone that has encountered me, my personal brand, over the years, whether directly or indirectly, you see a straight white guy living in South Carolina. My hope is that by listening through this episode, you understand that I would never sign up for the institutional hatred that we've seen over the last decade here. In fact, I'm devastated by it. I hurt every single day thinking about the pain that marginalized communities and individuals are going through, and it's getting worse every day. And it's my hope that the nuance allowed by a long form audio video platform like this can, even if it changes or it impacts the thought processes of one person listening, if you trust me based on the work that I've done over the years, and I'm going to continue to record this podcast and bring stories and experiences and lessons to you from my time here on Earth. If my nuanced thoughts can help you consider what we're going through as a country and understand the importance of the way that you use your vote and your voice moving forward, if I can help impact one person, then this episode and ultimately, I think this podcast will have been a success. Thanks for listening to Chris Strub Unmuted. Support the show by clicking like and subscribe. Keep up with me on social media at Chris Strub. And remember, we are all famous to a few people.